Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Get Jashed. Today I have with me my soul sister, Moriah Rochelle. Moriah is a passion and purpose integration coach. So she facilitates safe spaces for women to see their highest selves fully and with love. And she does this through vision quest and aura portrait workshops, and they are kind of magical. So I'm so excited to have you on here. Thanks so much for joining me, Moriah.
Yay, thank you so much for having me.
So we have been, even in the few months, like few short months that we've known each other, we've sort of already been in the depths of learning about ourselves even more and understanding ourselves. And you are someone that I see as having done and doing the work like so much. And by the work, I mean just sort of diving deep into understanding of yourself, but also working through the things that get in the way, as such, the way. And we have spoken about like how sharing our stories is so important because it gives voice to it for ourselves, but it also helps others. And just knowing a little bit about your story, not even the whole lot, I'm going to learn a whole lot today, but knowing a little bit about that is looking at the misnomers around spiritual awakenings in particular, and then what leads us to these so-called spiritual awakenings. Whether you subscribe to spirituality or not, it's still, we all have those moments in life where we're like, holy shit, this is where I'm at now. Right. Um, so do you want to just share a little bit about your understanding of spiritual awakenings, just to start us off, I think?
Yeah, so now what I know spiritual awakenings to be is like this intense unfolding of the self and like this initial reconnection, remembrance, like with who you are and what you came here to be. Um, so yeah, it is intense, it's very real, and it's just this huge cosmic experience of like you coming home to you, and like that might be portrayed as like this really blissful experience, but if you're watching this and if you're you and you're me, you know, that's not always the case at all. So
No. So because you were quite young when you started to explore what that meant for you. Um, so when you started to explore that, were you doing research? Did you have understandings or learnings around what it was written to be versus the reality of it?
yeah. So I was around 13 years old, and I remember like just beginning to really take a liking to spirituality. Like I think even before then I was like, I love spirituality. Like I had an idea of the zodiac and like just kind of into the little pieces that kind of like lead you into this. And I remember at the time looking up like what a spiritual awakening is, how to have one, and the way that it was portrayed on the internet was like, when you wake up into bliss. And I was 13 years old. I was not surrounded by anyone else who had any idea of spirituality. And like at 13 years old, I'm not going to reach out to like someone who's 30 and already had their awakening. Like that's just
Yeah.
that wasn't my reality, you know? Um, and so I remember I was walking home from school and I looked up and I felt like this connection to everything. And I knew in that moment that I'm like, okay, I'm like having like, you know, what I would actually consider to be like a first spiritual awakening into the self. And then I got home and the feelings went away and I thought I did something wrong, you know? So it was like this, like, oh my gosh, I'm waking up and then now I must have done something wrong to not be in bliss still. And at that point in my life, I started to resort to using drugs and psychedelics to cope with it. I didn't know anybody else at my age who was into spirituality or who had a spiritual awakening. So it was so scary, and I felt so alone. And it was a very dark period in my life, like having a spiritual awakening. And like I set up myself for it to be this huge, beautiful like experience, and now I can say that it has been. But then it was like total expectations crushed, and like this healing back into myself, and like this high awareness at such a young age, and like really feeling like I had to do this by myself. So
and there's a sense of isolation that can come from like the feeling of wanting more for your life, and especially at such a young age, like baby Moriah is just like this just wanting more, and the letdown that can come from that, like, and I think that's something that a lot of people suffer from, is the doing it wrong part, the I should be, like, quote unquote should be in bliss, and then when it goes away, like, it's like we forget that we are human when we seek these experiences, or when we look for these things, or when, like, to expand our awareness and our consciousness of our lives, we forget that we are human, and to be human means to feel all the feelings and not just be in bliss itself, but it is in the moments of bliss and the experiences in that as well. And it's extra tough when we don't necessarily have like the people around us that we have to build up that community as well. So did you find that, because you said when you got home it went away, and that can just be because you walked through a doorway and that's a different environment, right? But did you find that it wasn't something that your family or those close around you were sort of looking at or interested in, or?
Yeah, like I think, my family's like open to spirituality. They always have been. But to explain at that age, like I'm 13 years old, I just had a spiritual awakening. And to explain that to people who haven't had it or haven't looked into it and don't really know like what it is, like I was, afraid of being called crazy. And I know like a lot of this like is stuff like rooted in our past lives, like just like women who were called witches, like you're so afraid of being chastised, and I know like we carry that into the lives that we live today, so like I can just relate it back to that now. Like but that even happens in so many other aspects of life. But yeah,
It's it can also be like that fear of just showing up as we are, because we don't know how other people will respond, and especially if they have not like, because when there's such a loaded term also, spiritual awakening, right? Like there's so much meaning that we place on it, whether you are in it or not, and there's so much emphasis that we place on what that should mean too. So it can be really hard to then be like, hey, I'm 13 and I'm looking like I want a spiritual awakening, mom and dad, like, like, and then they're like, well, fuck, how do
like,
we
you
do
did what?
like, yeah. You did what? Exactly. Was there like a catalyst for you, because that is such a young age, and if I reflect back like on my own life, I feel like there was always like an awareness of, for me, I'd say it was like possibilities. So I was, well, what are the possibilities? But I hadn't gone so far as like labeling it as anything, and going, oh, it's a spiritual awakening, or it's a this, or it's a that. It was just like what else is there for me here, that kind of thing. And then I didn't do research, but like the internet didn't really, like, it depends on when it existed, right? So but was there a catalyst for you that led to that? Because that is such a profound moment that you could have that makes you go, oh, I'm going to research into this? Or was it just the following the curiosity?
Yeah, I think at the time it was just following curiosity. And I just like I remember being like 4 years old and like looking up at my dad and being like, Dad, like flowers come from seeds, but what made the seeds? And then what made all the things that made the seeds? And like I was always like a deep thinker. And so I always knew that I was here for more, and like that we were all here for more. And like I was just so inspired by that at a young age, and I just knew it. Like, and it wasn't so broad back then either. Like, and it was about 10 years ago. And like I know The Secret's been out for a while, but even then people were like, oh yeah, you've heard of The Secret, manifestation, like haha, like so, you know, it's like, so yeah.
It is,
Yeah.
it's like, I remember having a moment when I was under 10, I know that much. Like, I was in the single digits of age, and having this moment where I was just looking around, and it was like this awareness of, and I went to Catholic school and everything, so you know, whatever, I didn't know what the awareness was, but I just remember having this awareness of like feeling like that what I was looking through on my eyes were like windows.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I'm just looking out of windows, like, you know, and
Wow.
this, and it was just this weird thing. I'm like, oh, and if I couldn't see, would it still be real? Like, it was just this weird internal, like, not weird, weird because it was random. It came out of nowhere. Like, it was
Yeah.
like this internal dialogue of like, oh, I wonder about this. And then I kind of just left it. Um,
Of course.
yeah. And then life just happens. And then you find yourself back at another place where you have a curiosity again. So
Yeah.
when you had that moment, you said did you actually turn to drugs as a way, like psychedelics as a way of coping with the isolation and the wanting more and
Yeah, like a
the
hunger for like knowledge. I'm like,
mm,
okay, I just got a taste of it. Now I need to see the whole thing. And like, so again, just take you on a spiritual ego trip of yourself. Like, there is no whole thing, but I really, really love that I went through that part of my life, because it did bring me back to myself, to here to now, to know that like even Ram Dass talks about it, like he was like chasing a high, chasing this higher level of consciousness, and he always got low and always got sad again. And he was like, there is nothing to chase. It was just always about being here now.
yeah, that's it. Hey, like, because when we're chasing something and then we either get it or we don't, there is that the fallback of, oh, right, okay,
Yeah,
well, now what? Like, it's just this whole um it's like the hamster wheel. Like, we just get
exactly.
stuck on it otherwise. So what came out, like, what was like, so you went through that period of life as well. What came next, and what was the catalyst for how you continued on, like, on the journey of you to who you are now?
Um, so yeah, it basically took me a long time to realize that the only way to like actually ground back into my spirituality was to get sober. Um, and well, also I think it's pretty amazing that like at such a young age, even consciousness speaks to us then. And like just to hear your story and like me sharing my part as well, and like I even remember being 3 years old and looking up at a billboard and seeing 333, and then looking at a car and it drove past me and it said 333, and it's like all of our life always brings us right back to ourselves, like all the signs, all the like, it's all for us, just this big scene playing out, you know. But what made me like come back to it, or come back to myself, that was your question.
Yeah, well, it's not so much about come back to yourself, but what like led you from that part of your journey where you were seeking it through, yeah, like through drugs and like seeking more in that way, to the next part of your journey that helps, like it was like the next step or the next track.
Yeah. Well, so as soon as I realized you could have your own heart-centered business and you could like make money doing what you love, I then began devoting obsessively my life to building a business at a really young age, and like having a tarot business and Reiki, um and then like nothing ever coming out of it, but I still never gave up. And I feel like right now in my life I'm like at that point where you're kind of talking about like how did I like, where I'm like feel like I'm peaking almost, like things are starting to make sense and come together, like from everything that I went through to now, like it's all starting to make sense.
Yeah, we have those moments like because when we're in the shit, and I think that's part of the challenge of any growth period, right? Is like, and as we said at the beginning, is it can, spiritual awakening or just growing and growth and self-development, it's not like we just make a decision and then bam, everything's all like
Yeah.
rainbows and unicorns. It's when we're in the shit, like it can feel, we're like, like what is the point? I mean, it's my favorite question to ask, like my therapist, like I used to ask her all the time, like, but what's the point? Like I need to understand the point. Like, and she's just like, that is the question, isn't it? I'm like, yeah, so what is it? Like, and you just and you just go through it and you're like, all right, and then you reach this point, and I feel like, yeah, you're right, like this year for me as well has been a big one where I can kind of reflect back. I'm like, well, it sucked at times and it was challenging as hell at times and it was great at
Yeah,
times, but oh, I can actually kind of see how like all of that actually led me to here.
exactly.
Mm.
like
And it's
like oh, so go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, like, it's just, and it's not that we consciously choose it at the time. We're like, oh, fuck this, like, I don't want this. But at the same time, it's
Yeah.
necessary because it's the growth of us learning to make decisions in integrity with ourselves, learning to decide how to be in ourselves and how to, like, what it is about ourselves that we actually need. And there's so many times where I've been like, oh, I need this. I'm like, I know what I need. I don't need to learn. I know what I need. But then, like, there's so many different layers to it. So, yeah, it's just the whole,
100%.
mm, it's,
Yeah.
you go.
Oh, no, I was listening. I was like, yeah.
Yeah. It's the whole journey. And it's amazing that you've experienced it. Like, some people wait, like, no, I want to rephrase that anyway. Like, there's so many different, the whole point of this is like, there's so many different times that we will go through that in our lives anyway. And I think learning other people's journeys and learning other people's stories, and this is just a part of your story overall, right? Like, you have a
Yeah.
whole life as well. Like, we all have this whole life as well. But in, um, I was going to say in like this spiritual world, but also like in general, um, we can get so caught up in comparison and be like, oh, they're further along than me, or oh, like, I suck at this and they're better. And, whereas really it's just, it doesn't matter how old you are or young you are, there is always something that you are learning. Like, and you'll see it. You'll have a moment, you'll have several moments, but you'll have a moment where you can reflect back and go, oh, I was actually learning something there. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's powerful as well. How has that changed? Like, maybe not changed is the right word, but how has that led into your understanding of yourself now?
Which part?
Just any of it really, like any of that journey or that ability to reflect back and go, oh, I can see how that has led me to where I am now. How has that like impacted how you see yourself and how you make the decisions that you make for yourself now?
Wow. I mean, so first of all, just realizing like that there is like a way to have a grounded approach to your life. Whereas before it was like, I don't know, like I'm just gonna do this and see if it feels right. And like, and that's like what I'm learning, not like the most grounded way like to approach my life or our life in general, like I'm learning that like you know, so there is alignment. There are things that like literally align with you, and like there are certain pathways that don't align with you. And yes, even if you go down a pathway that doesn't align with you, you will soon eventually feel and learn that and feel the misalignment of it. But basically, going through all that has made me realize like there are options to weigh out, and like situations and people that don't serve our highest alignment. And like, as scary as it can be, sometimes you just gotta like do what feels the most connected and aligned, because that alone is what raises the vibration of consciousness. And like, well, I think about this all the time. It's like, if we come to earth and we don't do what we're here to do, it's like going to a child's birthday party dressed as a stripper. It's like come to earth in your earth uniform, in your meat suit, and do what feels good and right and aligned. Because the more we do that, the more we create this literal ripple effect outwards. And I think like it's actually pretty powerful that we are talking about awakenings right now, because it's happening at a more rapid rate than ever before. And so just like, yeah, like, even if people aren't aware of consciousness or aware of what's happening in our world, they're going through an ascension process in some way or another. Because we're one collective consciousness, we're literally all going through it together right now, in the thick of it, like never before.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
it's quite a year for it also. And I was having this conversation with someone yesterday as well, like the realizations, and there's something I want to touch on in this as well that you've mentioned, but like the realizations that have come about because of this year, like because of COVID and everything else tied up in this year, is there's been like a clearing out of, whether it's conscious decision making or not, there's been this clearing out of what it is we want to experience or how it is that we want to feel, and actually just choosing differently for ourselves. Like whether it's setting different kinds of boundaries or healthy boundaries with people that we may not have considered having to do that with before, or just deepening our own understanding of what it is we want and desire and how we want to live our lives and who we want included in our lives. All of these things have made such a such a breakthrough in everyone that I've spoken to, again, whether they are someone who identifies as spiritual or not. Like there's such a breakthrough in that understanding of what it is that each individual desires. But what I also hear in your story, and what I see now also, is when you were 13, it was like you were looking for something external to yourself.
Yeah,
Whereas
100%.
and it's so easy to get caught up in that, especially when you start to look into the spiritual like element of because how it's written about and how people, like not everyone, but how some people will share about it. It's like, oh, it's just external experience, it's external power, when really it's actually like this deepening of our understanding of ourselves. And that's what it sounds like your work with yourself, but also in your work and how you show up in the world has become. It's like become less about seeking something outside of you and more about seeking a deeper connection and relationship with what's within you.
Yes, 100%.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it more grounded. That's what makes it more of this fulfilling, enriching experience, even in the shitty, tough times, because I think that's what it's actually like, life. That's what it's really more about, is the more we connect with ourselves, the more we can actually feel connected in general, rather than isolated. Like you said, you felt isolated going through, like, or trying to go through that experience as well.
Yeah.
So has that changed for you a lot this year, or what's your experience been
Yes.
there?
Yeah, so like I feel like at that time, like I'm trying to fit in with people, trying to fit in with certain crowds, and now I'm like realizing that through every action I made, I was craving the alignment of our birthright, which is community, abundance. So like every action we take is so harmless, or not, yeah, it's harmless, it's totally harmless, and it's all from the heart, and we never really realize it until like we're out of it. But like our intentions are always pure. So my intention to fit in was just my intention to bring myself community. And even though that wasn't what fully came out of it, now I know that that was the shadow work that needed to be done for me to attract a heart-centered, aligned, loving community. So every action that we take is for our highest alignment, even when it is out of alignment. So
yeah, it's almost like the things that we don't like about ourselves or about our behavior, about what shows up, is actually what is, it still has the same intention of our highest good. It just shows up in that alternative way. So it actually gives us a chance to go, right,
yes,
you are just trying to fit in. Like, you just want community and connection around you. Great. Okay, let's work with that. Like,
exactly.
this is what we can do. Yeah.
Yeah, and like you said, like seeking external and internal connection, like realizing that, me smoking and like doing drugs was like me seeking a connection to myself. And once I realized that that was the block, but also like the paramount I had reached when I couldn't get closer to myself if I kept getting high, it was like, oh, okay, so the only way to get again closer to myself was to cut out that external connection to self, because it wasn't actually there. So you actually realize like the veil just kind of drops in all of our paramountal experiences, so
Yeah. It's a nice understanding when we have those moments of, oh, right, okay. Actually, that's a really good way to put it too. Like, because sometimes those experiences are what, like, it's like, there's the analogy of, like, you get to the top of one hill and then you can see further, and then you get to the top of the next hill and then you can see further, like it keeps going. And that is life, right? Like, we can't see all the way beyond all of the hills and all of the everything. But the way you've just described it as well is like, even though overall, and now, right now, that reliance on drugs as a way to connect with yourself isn't useful for you in your experience, and in that moment it was useful to get you to that, like you said, that paramount, that point, to be like, oh, okay, this led me to here. And I'm not saying everyone needs to go out and do drugs to do that. Like, it's one person's journey, right? But like, this led me, just had to have that disclaimer, but like, this led me to here. And then you were able to go, right, okay, that served its purpose.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, yeah, but it's almost like recognizing these moments that don't have to be the overarching be all and end all of how we do life, but they can serve a purpose, and then they can be like shifted and changed and dropped away. Like, the drug use, it was like, yeah, this served the purpose, because then I got to this point, I realized, now I can kind of let that go as such. I hate saying let it go, because it makes it sound so much easier than what it is. Like, just let it go. Don't acknowledge anything. Just let it go. Push it away. Like, no, at all. Was that a challenging experience to come out of that phase of your life? Did it feel challenging, or was it something that felt easy because there was such clarity around it?
Yeah, once it finally happened, I realized that my body could no longer handle getting high. Because what I've learned, and this definitely floats around, is that this is our body's journey, not our journey. So like when the body talks, it's like straight up, like there was literally, from that moment forward, I could not have spent another moment getting high. Like I genuinely, like I didn't have the space for it in my body anymore, which is amazing, because when you think about like light moving through your body, that's all that really happened. Is light was literally just pouring through my body at that point. I didn't have space to bring in something that was so heavy and dense. And I just remember as well, like at one point I was like, oh my gosh, like I felt like I was gonna relapse, and a huge like bat flew in front of my car, and it was like so like perfect. It was just like, it looked like a drawing. And I ended up, was because I've always been into spirit animal totems as well, and I looked up what it meant, and bats are specific for addiction. And I know, so it was like, it basically said you can't keep going down this path if you want to heal. And so it was just like, you know what, like the world speaks, and the world speaks to me in my own language, and it speaks to you in your own language. And to have that connection was just like what more could I ask for, you know? So
yeah,
just like, just knowing that the universe is there, like to guide you and support you in every freaking way, and in your language, like in a way that you understand. Like I can't think of a more like healing, grounding, profound feeling than to have that type of support from something so ginormous when you look outside of you, you know?
yeah, definitely. And it is like when we reach, I really like that as well, because it's like when we reach a threshold of an experience, it suddenly does become too much, like, or it feels like there's no space for it. So that's a
Yeah.
really useful way, in whatever way it shows up for people, in whatever scenario as well. It's a really useful way to be able to check in and go, do I have space for this? And like, first, why or why not? Like, why don't I have space for it? And sometimes it's because that, like in your case, like it was like, you know, this lesson, this journey has been, this part of the journey is done now, and it doesn't serve you anymore. And other times it's because we're not giving space to ourselves, which is why we might not have space for something. So it's just allowing that, again, the self-reflection to understand what it means to you, is really, really empowering for people as well when they're going through the journey of whatever that is for them as well.
Yeah.
And what you're sharing, like I feel like that shows up a lot in the work of how you show up in your work now, like with your aura portraits. It's really just about honoring like visions. I was like, there was so many words that just flew through my head just then. I'm like, which one? All of it, like, but honoring like that it's your way, because it's your view, it's your perspective, it's your experience of the
Connection.
world and connection with the universe, right? So that's how you relate to it, which is perfect, because that's how you show up in your work.
Yeah.
You teach people how to do that, but you also show people like what you see for them, whether, like, you know, and then create that. And that's why I think your work is so powerful and so resonant with so many people, is because it speaks to that, because it speaks true to you, even if it's not like I'm gonna make you cry. But like, even if like, and that's what I think is so powerful about using our voices from our perspectives. And there's something that keeps coming up like in my mind, is like, just say that, like it's about, regardless of how differently different people might see the world, when we show up and in that open, loving way, obviously, because we do see the world differently, like each person does, but when we show up in a way that's true to ourselves, we give permission to other people to do it, but we also create, and you alluded to it before with like the like the vibration of it, but we create more of that energy in the world, more of that ability for people to keep doing that for themselves, because it's
Yeah.
inspiring, or it's a catalyst for someone, even if that's not the language they speak. For example, they might see that aura portrait of themselves and be like, oh, there's something in that though that's speaking to me, and how can I show up in this way? Like, so it's just about, like, it just feels like there's this, the more that we and people like you with your magic show up, or everyone with their magic shows up in the way that is true for them, because it's
Yes.
from that connected place, it empowers and creates more of that magic for other people to be like, oh, I can show up, and then it just keeps going and it keeps going and it keeps going, and that's the power in it. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Mm.
100%. Like
Mm.
showing people that they can have like a real palpable experience with the universe is like, yeah, I think it therein lies all of our gifts, you know, like
Yeah.
whether it's somatic or whether it's art or whether it's talking and healing, like, yeah.
Yeah. Because you showing up with your gifts in your gifts can enable, or like it can create the space for someone else to have some little like twing of an experience, right? It doesn't have to be this huge profound thing. It can be just little like huh, like something in the back there that's like, oh, there's something in that, and then that is their catalyst in some way, or it's part of their catalyst for them to be like, oh, where's my expansion, where's my experience, what do I have, like, or my connection with myself, and that's part of the experience, like that's key to the experience. So I think if nothing else, I feel like the lesson that's been reinforced for me, but also the lesson like that we can all have reinforced or learned, is that it's trusting the journey, but also trusting the nudges and trusting your own way of doing things and your own magic, because that's what the world needs from you.
100%.
Mm. Anything else you wanted to add?
I am soaking it in.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so I feel like that's a perfect reminder actually for today of like, yeah, trusting those nudges, even if it doesn't quite make sense for you, as long as it's resonant with you in some way, the sense will come. The sense
Yeah.
will definitely come, and then it does. So
Yeah. This kind of like full circles even our like spiritual awakening topic. Like it doesn't have to be this huge thing. It can just be like, again, the little breadcrumbs of our experience. I think that's so important for people to hear because like like you see on the internet and you're like, oh my gosh, they do this and they have this and they have that, and it's like they're just showing you that when they have that, you know, like
yeah,
they followed breadcrumbs to get there. So like whatever it would look like to expand that for you, like this is what I always say, I'm like, the secrets are out. Yoga works, body movement works, tarot cards, like crystals, the chakras, like you want to know about the universe and how to connect with it, it's out. The secrets are out, and the people who are doing it and the people who are the most connected that you see, that you admire, they're doing it. So go do what they're doing, and in your own way,
yeah,
and deepen your connection that way. So
yeah. And don't be so afraid of it, like, and if it's something that you look at and go, oh well, I'm not into that, that's fine, but don't be afraid of what you are into. Like, don't be afraid
yeah,
of what does speak to you, because as long as it's like the caveat of like, as long as it's not like grossly unhealthy, or illegal, like to a degree, but like, like do what speaks to you and trust what's like, I can keep going, but like trust what speaks to you, and 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 trust that for yourself. Like, yeah, really practice trusting it, even if it's little baby steps. Follow like one breadcrumb at a time.
yep.
Thank you so much for joining me and giving me all of this food for thought. I really appreciate it. But to wrap up, I want to um, let people know where they can follow you and follow your work. So where is that?
So my Instagram is Moriah Rochelle. It's
I'll include
Moriah.
it. Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
include it all in the notes as well. But yep.
Yeah. And then once you add me on there, I'll add you on Facebook and we'll just go from there.
Excellent. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining and sharing a part of your journey, because there's so many parts of all of our journeys, but thank you for sharing a part of your journey here so that we can all tap into a little bit more of our own and come to hopefully a deeper, healthier understanding of what that is.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me, Jessie. And I love you so much. And I'm so grateful for you and all the love and the work and the light that you bring into our world. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.